matter of fact, Krugman in the New York Times brought it up. Obama and somebody else got together, get a good job, get a good education, blah, 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 blah. While the next day, there was an article on attorneys. And thousands and thousands of attorneys and paralegals are thrown out of work because their purpose in life was to go through emails during the discovery process to come up with smoking guns. And now, of course, a program will go like nobody's business. The tendency, not temporocentrism, is ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the tendency to look at another society from your own viewpoint. Oh, these people are so funny, they eat raw lamb, whatever. I haven't loved raw lamb. No, but how do they do that? That's ethnocentric. Temporocentrism is to look at tomorrow from the vantage point of today. You're walking along, the things are fine. Man, you're dead, carved up the curve. Too bad, but that's, things change very quickly. And so to say that things have to go along as they are is not at all the case. I mean, things can change really quite rapidly. If you look at as I said, the education, the agricultural workforce, from 40% to 2% in 60 years, 70 years, 100 years. Problems, of course, can go away too. The biggest problem facing cities in 1894. Do you know who knows what the biggest problem facing cities was in 1894? It was terrible, absolutely horrible. They had a conference on urban things in New York City. They couldn't solve the problem. The biggest problem in 1894, and if you look at it, everybody basically the letter was horse manure. They calculated that by 1950, London would be covered to a depth of 9 feet with horse manure. Each horse produces 22 pounds of manure a day. I mean, this may not be apocryphal, but I believe it's really the case. And of course, like that, the car came along, and now we're just our beer is poisoned. But one thinks perhaps of Medicare, Medicaid, the tremendous expenses that are going to be. Well, maybe, maybe not. I mean, with expert systems, I would rather trust my diagnosis to a computer program than my doctor. He's pretty good, he said. Associate professor at Columbia, but still at all, I mean, I'd rather have a program. All he does is, taps my knee a couple times, just looks in my eye, and then waits for the blood to come back. That's it. Everything's on the blood. That's it. So I don't think, price, for example, Medicare D or whatever, the pill part of it, the prescription part, so it's been much less than everybody expected because a lot of things are going off, becoming generic, off the patent release. And all these expensive drugs are going to become generic in the not too distant future. So if I have to say anything, it's A, unemployment is coming down the line, and B, for me at least, unemployment is good. You see, that's backwards thinking. You have to think about things backwards. What's bad is good, good is bad. For example, it'll get you a Nobel Prize. How many have heard of the positron? Oops, time to go, 20 minutes? That's it? Okay, just one thing. P.A.M. Dirac was reading one of Einstein's equations, and he said, wait a second, it's the square root of something. Well, the square root is plus and minus, right? Plus and minus. So, he said, well, suppose we do the minus, because, the square root of 4 is plus or minus 2. Minus 2 times minus 2 is 4. And he said, well, gosh, an electron, you have to put the positive sign, positron. And then a couple of years later, they flew one of these things up into a balloon, and there was a little path which looked the same curlicule that an electron would have, except that it went the other way. Oh, wow. Yeah. That was backwards thinking, you see. Just change the sign. So I got a patent from that. There was a patent, they used to have a light pen that would read the screen. Back in the days of the CRT, there was a little wand with a wire that came out, and you pointed, and you would know exactly where you were pointing. And the way it knew that was because the flying dot that went across the screen, the raster, would time it and say, well, this is where it is, it must be over here. That's where we go. And I said, well, suppose the screen read the pen. And I thought, well, let's put a ray of light into the screen. Well, I got rid of that very quickly. And I said, well, wait a second, we can read the stylus from the side. It's like emitting light now, we can just read it from the side. Fine, so we have a little video chip along the bezel, which can determine by rangefinder. Because I remember back when cameras actually had rangefinders, like double things. I said, you can just determine where it is by the double image rangefinder. And I said, well, wait a second. since it's got this video chip along the edge, the bezel, if we have a little mirror in front and we put a piece of paper and slip it through there, we have a scanner. And so the patent was for the cooperative use of a digitizer to both determine the position of the stylus and digitize graphic information on a piece of paper. And that was from backwards thinking. So that's enough. Now, so any questions? How's that? If this has been a little bit coherent, it's because I'm a little bit coherent and it's getting late in the day, but the bottom line to take away from this is, I mean, these are early times. I would say maybe 100 years, 50 years, but it's going to be there. Nobody has nothing? Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, find it out.
So when do you think somebody is going to win the grand prize?
After I'm dead. Probably. I don't know. That's a good point. That's the problem is what will the contest come on after I'm dead? You can ask me about the Loebner Prize if you want. I didn't want to go into that because I've done that so many times. Not that it would bore me, but I thought I'd give Rich something new, different, but true. Originally, I was asked to do it at the Cambridge Center and it asked me to put up the contest. That was my idea, but Robert Epstein said, let's do it. And in 2000, I got a letter saying the board of directors directed the executive director to have nothing to do with the contest, but the rules were they had to be held every year. And so I sued them, and it was okay. It was fun. I mean, I did it at pro se, so I didn't get as much as I wanted. They wanted to give me my $125,000 back. I wanted $500,000 because I won the whole thing. So we settled for $150,000, which was a sort of a moral victory. I mean, if I had an attorney, probably would have got all $500,000, but it was fun. I went out to Boston, the wonderful trip along the road, on the railroad. They had a wonderful lobster place next to, right next to the federal courthouse. It was wonderful. At one point, their attorney said, "Why do you spare us the horror of this, Mr. Loebner, under level?" I said, "Well, it's not too bad. It's enjoyable." She said, "You're doing this for fun?" I said, "No, I'm doing it because I have to, but it's really quite pleasant." But anyway, the answer is I don't know. Here's one thing. Okay, let me correct one misapprehension about Alan Turing and the Turing test and Alan Turing's article. And if you read it, everybody says, well, Turing was wrong. He said the test would be passed 50 years. Past 50 years and we haven't done it. That's not what he said or wrote. He said, I predict that in 50 years a computer program would be able to fool a judge with a 70% probability in a 5-minute conversation. There are 3 things about that. He didn't say, I predict it will be 50 years to pass the test. He was simply making a prediction of where things would be in 50 years. Number 2, the idea of 70%, well, you don't expect better than 50% anyway. If you had 2 humans, it's, if the computer is going to be as good as the human, you don't expect 50%. So to pass the test, there are four simultaneous Turing tests going on. It's not one. The Turing test only has 3 entities: a judge, a human, and a computer. So you only expect full half the judges when compared to half the people. The other thing is that it has audio-visual input. People say, it's got to be text only, it's got to be text only. No. There's a cartoon I saw once where a guy comes to another person, he says, pardon me, sir, could you direct me to the illiterates club? And behind them is a big sign saying illiterates club, right? Okay, so, how can you have the Turing test with an illiterate? No, you can't. If you assume it's text, but it's not. You can have, so speech and audio-visual input. I actually wanted robotics, but the committee didn't want to do that, and I figured, I'm getting enough trouble, so let's not. So the answer is I don't know. You had a question?
It's actually the same question.
What do you know? Great minds. Anything else? Nothing? Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what do you think the most interesting innovation has been in your lifetime that you've seen?
Oh, that's good. That's it. What I've seen the most interesting? I don't know. I've seen a lot of them. I think downloading porno is really hot, but I don't know. What else? What is that? Maybe the digital camera? I really don't. There's so many things. I'm getting old. I'm 69, So it's hard to say. I grew up with TV. My father was an innovator, so I've always had TV. And the other things are sort of incremental, color TV and so forth. The computer, I suppose. Yeah, the computer. I think the first time I saw a web browser that had pictures, I was, oh, wow, look at that. When it started off with links where you just had these little, you clicked on something and what was it, Spider on the web browser. But when I saw it with pictures, I said, wow. Yes, probably the internet and e-commerce. That's been a revolutionary shift. I mean, yes, you know, you don't have to worry about anything. I just thinking there it is. I mean, the local stores are going. There's no more. You can get rid of a lot of middlemen, no dealers. For example, my company sells brass rails and fittings and some other things. And my father had stands at the portable post. You see, and we had a lot of dealers. You know, they go around to bars and restaurants with their attached AK. So we've got some dealers, but now almost all of them are gone. The people just do a search on Google, you know, and boom, there it is. You say, I want a stand. Boom, we come up pretty high. Yeah. You know, I can talk into it. Really, Google. That's enough. It's hard. The internet, computers, yes.
Okay, following up on this question, so when an entity does win the grand prize for the Loebner contest, what will that, what in your opinion do you think that's going to do for us? Because it's interesting that...
It'll get me, if I'm still alive, I'll be relieved of a vexation. I'll say that. I don't know, not really.
Well, because there are two, let me clarify the question, because there are two, like, I think, sides to this. There's the trying to make a bot pretend it's human, yet the actual current successful commercial application, they're advocates of making sure that the people who are dealing with it know that it
can solve your problems.
Yeah.
Anything a human can do. I mean, because they exclude robotics. But that's it. For anything where you have a human doing it, you could have a computer doing it. Because that's the idea. The computer is the equivalent of a human. Period. That's it. Anything you want.
But does it need to be the equivalent of a human to solve your problem?
No, it doesn't need to be the equivalent of a human. But if it is the equivalent of a human, then it can solve your problem. I mean, that's a greater than required. You understand? It's more than you need.
I understand, I guess, but not every human you encounter can solve your problem.
No, as a matter of fact, most humans are pretty stupid. Honestly, I mean, you have no idea. I deal with them all the time on the phone. Really.
What are your thoughts on the IBM Watson system?
Very good. It was a very restricted domain. Here's the question, here's the answer. So I mean, you have to search it out. So it wasn't nearly as difficult as most people think, but still it was a tour de force. But you notice they didn't enter the Loebner Prize contest, which is a lot more complicated because you can talk about anything. But I mean, there's a definite answer for everything. It's definite, this is the answer, cut and dry, boom, right, wrong, back. You just have to reverse it around. It got people interested in AI to some extent. And you're talking about expert systems, for example, medical systems would be a fine example. I have this disease, this is, these symptoms, what's wrong with me? And as a matter of fact, that's been around for a while anyway. It's just, I think, the inertia on physicians and so forth to be replaced by humans. I mean, they have devices now in an airplane can take off, fly, and land all by itself. I mean, that's all automated. It can be. And the pilot can just sit down and look at it. I don't know, but I'm telling you, really, and there's some other things I can go into, but I only have 20 minutes when I don't have 20 hours. The goal, it's not the goal, but it's just continuous. It's just continuous increasing in productivity, and eventually, that's it. It's got to be. I mean, that has to be. And every time people say, "Well, there'll be a new job," no. I mean, no. I would like to see somebody set up a contest to produce a screwdriver from taking the ore, mining the ore, to delivering it on some place on Earth, that's a given spot, without the intervention of a human hand. That would be just produce a screwdriver. It could be a very simple screwdriver, maybe just a bench, but it doesn't have to be a very fancy handle. Just has to have a handle, maybe even a Phillips screwdriver, I don't know. But from mining the ore to delivering it. As a matter of fact, now that you have these little processors, we can print out objects. That might even be simpler. Anything else? No?
Thank you so much.